All right, so my presentation this year was on analytics in the NBA, especially as evidenced by the viewership. So have you ever watched Netflix and seen this movie? It's called Moneyball. It stars Brad Pitt. It focuses on the analytical approach of the Oakland Athletics in the early 2000s. And that team was one of the first examples of analytics and analytics professionals in sports. This team used analytics to compete with teams with bigger budgets by signing cheaper alternatives who produce similar value. This approach led to increased analytic usage across all of sports, but especially in the NBA. According to a 2023 article, leveraging big data analytics to revolutionize sports, about 80% of NBA teams now employ at least one analytics professional. However, there are two teams that are on the forefront of this analytics movement. These are the Golden State Warriors and the Houston Rockets. The Golden State Warriors are led by a duo of Splash Brothers. They're called Klay Thompson and Stephen Curry. They are given this name because of their incredible ability to shoot the three-pointer. One year they won 73 games, which was a new NBA record, although they did end up losing in the finals. This team attempted approximately 32 three-pointers per game, according to a 2016 article by Beckwith and Chen, which was the second most all time. However, the Houston Rockets took it to a whole new level the next year. They employed a small ball lineup, which meant that no starter was taller than 6'7", and they attempted approximately 46 threes per game, which shattered the previous year's record. However, there are some results of this increased shooting. One of them is increased scoring, because, you shoot more three-pointers, you're going to score more. Another one is a lack of parity. Every team pretty much plays the same way. Everyone wants to shoot the three as much as possible, or they just want to get as many layups. So players have lost a lot of their skill. And then finally, longer games. Teams are having to call more timeouts, and there is more fouling because players are getting tired, so they want to slow the game down. So now let's transition into my literature review. So first, we must know what the sports analytics movement is. It's a movement by teams of almost all sports to the use of analytics in one form or another. However, this use can vary depending on the sport. One example is in cricket. This is a sport primarily played in England and its former colonies, examples Australia, India, etc. It was invented in the early 1700s, and according to a 2022 article by Muhammad Tahir, analytics used in cricket aid in the selection of players, strategy, conditions, and matchups. This ensures max efficiency and increases each team's winning percentage. Another example is in American football. The primary American football league is the NFL, or National Football League. In this league, participants earn large sums of money for strong performances, like reaching the Super Bowl or the playoffs. They get bonuses to their salary. In this game, there is a constant battle between offense and defense. And according to Marius Otting, teams are using analytics to try to predict other teams' plays and to make real-time adjustments. They are trying to get any leg up that they can. And finally, let's talk about basketball. While the analytics approach has been successful in many sports, it has not changed the way it has in basketball, specifically in the NBA, or National Basketball Association. The NBA was founded on June 6, 1946, and when it initially started, games were low scoring and slow paced. They were focused on the center, or the big man. These are players that are 6'10" or above, and they just kind of stand around the basketball game and shoot layups. But also, when you're 6'10", you're generally pretty slow. So whenever the game is focused on them, it ended up being a lot more slow paced, which ended up causing it to be very defensive, and games ending up with final scores of like 75-70. However, this pattern changed in the 1980s when the NBA added the three-point line. The best players are now smaller, more athletic guards. Guards are players that are generally under 6'8" and can shoot. You've probably heard of some of these players: Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, just to name a few. And this is the point when the league started emphasizing the jump shot. However, although three-pointers were introduced in the 1980s and 90s, they really took off in the early 2010s. This corresponds to the increased analytics usage, because there was an increased emphasis on the fact that three-pointers were worth 1.5 times more than a two-pointer. This change was called the three-point revolution, which is defined as the rapid strategic growth of the National Basketball Association offenses and defenses towards attempting the three-point field goal. And now, as a result, scoring is at an all-time high. It was found that teams are shooting 10 times more threes now than 40 years ago. So while increased shooting led to more scoring, it has perhaps coincidentally corresponded to a decrease in viewership quality. According to Lewis, regular season viewership is down close to half in the past 30 years. So now let's address the gap. While this may appear to show causation, there has actually been no research done on it, especially on areas without a team. It was important to include this last aspect on areas without a team because these fans are the ones that are watching it on TV. And so if they're unhappy with the product, they're more likely just to stop watching altogether because they don't get that pretzel and the nachos and stuff at the game. So this led me to my research question. How has increased analytics use in the NBA affected viewership in areas without an NBA team? I hypothesized that analytics have had a negative effect on viewership quality just through social media conjecture and talking with people who did not participate in the survey and how they felt. So to determine the answer to this question, I had to pick a research method. I debated between an interview-based study, an observational study, or a survey. Before I tell you which one I chose, I'll tell you the drawbacks of the two that I did. First off, the interview. I felt like it was more likely to be biased, as the respondents would try to tell me what I wanted to hear as opposed to how they actually felt. As for an observational study, I would have had to require participants to watch games that they ordinarily wouldn't watch. And so that would skew their responses because they wouldn't be as invested in the game. So this led me to a survey. The survey allowed me to reach a wider audience and narrow down based on location. It also allowed me to eliminate response bias because I could stay anonymous as the sender. Additionally, it gave me easily quantifiable data that I could then convert to statistics. So the questions I used in my survey were, are you willing to participate in this study? Would you like to stay anonymous? Where are you from? What is your name? What is your email address? What is your favorite NBA team? How long have you been watching games? About how many games do you watch per year? Have the number of games you watch per year increased or decreased since you first started, which was generally about 5 years since it was mostly high school students? How would you rate your viewing experience on a scale of 0 to 10? Has your viewing experience improved or worsened in the past few years? And if you said worsened, why do you think that is the case? So now my findings from this survey are as follows. So this is my graph for about how many games do you watch per year. As you can see, it is very skewed right. The vast majority of people watch between 0 and 10 games. However, there were a few outliers as some people watched greater than 40. This was my second graph, and this was how would you rate your viewing experience of NBA games. This was on a scale of 0 to 10, with 0 being very poor and 10 being excellent. As you can see, the most common was a 7, but the average response was a 6.3125. There were 2 responses of 4 and 1 of 9, but there was no strong skew. I next wanted to determine how their viewing quality had changed. So, given 3 choices, they were given the choice of worsened, stayed the same, or improved. 60% felt it had worsened, 33.3% felt that it had stayed the same, and only 6.7% felt that it had improved. So now I needed to determine the cause of this change. They were given the options: 3-pointers, lack of competition, commercials, favorite player retiring, blackouts, defense, super teams, and bad teams. There was no majority reason, but the most common was the lack of defense, followed by super teams and increased 3-pointers. However, respondents were able to select multiple reasons, so this is not like they were able to select like defense and lack of competition or commercials. So what does this mean? The researcher found that while NBA viewership and people's perception of the quality of this viewership has gone down, this cannot be directly attributed to analytics. Instead, it can be tied to a variety of factors, which will be discussed shortly. So these are the different modes of people watching NBA games. As you can see, the first 3 are general streaming services, such as NBA TV, YouTube TV, and ESPN. These are all 3 that are subject to blackouts. These services can block out games in different regions for people that they don't want to watch it, who aren't paying for like the whole package. And then of course, in person is pretty self-explanatory. You go to the game and you watch it. However, people who are experiencing blackout games are less likely to be affected by analytics because they just aren't able to watch the game in general. And this is illustrated by the fact that 60% of people said that their viewing experience had decreased in the past 5 years. This is important because it illustrated that viewing quality has actually decreased and it was not just kind of a perception. This next led me to question how people would rate their experience on a scale of 0 to 10. As stated earlier, the average response was a 6.3125, with some responses being much higher. However, these higher responses were likely because of a period of extended success for that person's favorite team, such as the Golden State Warriors or the Phoenix Suns, who are currently in the run for an NBA championship. This was important for me to know because I wanted to determine if the responses are actually lower than expected or just regressing to the mean. And I concluded that the viewership ratings are actually unnaturally low. So now I needed to figure out the cause of this change, whether it was analytics or not. The non-analytics reasons included streaming blackouts, too many commercials, retirement of popular players, and the lack of competitiveness. The analytics-based responses are too many threes, lack of defense, bad teams, or super teams. As you may notice, I did not include an analytics category explicitly. I did not want to cause any confusion because I didn't think many people would know the overarching idea of analytics, so I preferred to put the results of it. So this led me to determine that they're inconclusive results, because 64% of respondents selected at least one analytics reason, but it's still 43% of respondents still selected at least one non-analytics reason. So there was not a significant enough difference for me to determine that there was a difference. This established that while analytics have played a role, they are not the only factor, but instead one of many. Some could oppose this argument through a time focus, since it only took place in the last 5 years, and thus lines up with the increased use of analytics. I would respond to this by saying that TV blackouts and commercials are also up in the last 5 years, with the sale of TV rights to third-party services like Bally Sports. This illustrates that there are a variety of reasons for this change in viewership. Some limitations of my study are the small sample size, as I was only able to get about 25 responses, and the lack of geographical representation since it was mostly people that lived in West Texas, so it cannot be generalized to the whole population. Another limitation is a lack of a relevant application. Teams are unlikely to change because analytics help them win championships, and they're able to make money from selling their TV rights to streaming services. So in response to my research question, has increased use of analytics directly decreased viewership in areas without an NBA team? I would have to respond by saying that analytics have played a role in viewership numbers decreasing, but so have many other reasons. So my hypothesis that analytics have had a negative effect was not entirely wrong, because they have, but so have many other factors. This was surprising to me because conversations with others had led me to form that conclusion, or that hypothesis. It does show some correlation because increased analytics use in the last 5 to 10 years has also corresponded to decrease in viewership quality. So ultimately, this led me to conclude that analytics are not the only cause of the decline in viewership. Other causes include non-analytics based responses, such as TV blackouts based on region, too many commercials, or even retirement of popular players like Dirk Nowitzki. So all this begs the question, how does this address the gap? Although it does not answer the question about how analytics have affected the viewing experience, it does provide insight as to some reasons as to why the viewership quality has decreased. And it also shows that viewership quality has worsened, although not necessarily why. So what are the implications of this study? It serves as a suggestion to NBA teams to improve the product of their games on TV. Although it doesn't have to be through removal of analytics, it can be through less extreme measures like limiting TV blackouts or commercials. Certain teams like the Phoenix Suns and their WNBA counterpart, the Phoenix Mercury, have done this, and they have received overwhelmingly positive feedback from their fans. So I would suggest to other NBA teams to include the same approach. So my suggestions for future research were I would recommend performing a larger study. This would provide more conclusive data with more concrete implications. Or performing a wider reaching study to get a general idea of the whole country, because then it would give you a general idea of the whole population's ideas and feelings. And finally, and perhaps the most telling, I would do the study again in towns with NBA teams. This could determine the true impact of analytics without worrying about TV blackouts or commercials skewing experience. These blackouts do not take place in cities with the teams, only in other regions. And fans here would be most affected by the overall quality of gameplay because they would be the most invested in those teams. So in conclusion, while my research may not have provided a definitive answer to the extent of impact of analytics on viewing quality, it did show that there is a problem with the viewing quality of NBA games currently, a problem that needs to be addressed.
Thank you, Rohan. We do have a few questions for you.
Perfect.
How did the choices you made when designing or implementing your research method impact your research process?
So whenever I chose to do a survey, I mean, I probably didn't go about it the best way initially. I was just gonna try and text it out to a bunch of people, and I was like, oh, that kind of ruins the anonymity of it. Like, I want people not to know that what I'm asking and what I'm looking for. So then I was like, I will just post this on like, I was posting it on my mom's social media or something, and I didn't put my name or anything on there. And she has like 500 followers or something. And so then all those responses allowed me to remain anonymous while also getting the number of responses I wanted.
How did the limitation of your method or data influence your new understanding?
So the limitation of my method was that, I mean, I couldn't really reach as many people as I wanted to, because I mean, the vast majority of people that my mom is friends with on Instagram live in this area or in Texas in general. So I wasn't able to reach a whole population of the country and get like a general idea. So that ended up causing me to come up with inconclusive results because I wasn't able to like generalize it. So I couldn't give a definitive answer as to what the cause was.
Okay, and if you could revisit your research process, what would you do differently and why?
I would probably go through and do interviews on top of my survey responses. I would have really liked to dig into what they felt like was the primary reason as to their change in viewership, as opposed to just allowing them to pick multiple. And if I was able to interview, I could kind of dig deeper and like find their reasoning behind it, and that might show me more. That might determine a more definitive response.